3, 2, 1.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's the Nittany No Huddle Podcast. From Philadelphia to Los Angeles and everywhere in between. Filmed at the Nittany No Huddle studio. It's Jordo, Zach, and Coach Devin covering all things Penn State football all the time.
This is from 45 and it's blocked. Lions scoop it up. Brad Haley will score.
And here we go.
Welcome back, Nittany No Huddle Nation. Today we're going to be covering the Auburn game in more depth, and we have a guest on the podcast, Alex Myers, our resident Alabama fan. So he's going to come in and talk SEC a little bit for us at the end as well. So for today's podcast, we actually have a sponsor somehow. Don't know how it happened, but we got one. Shout out to our sponsor, We Are NILcollective.com. We Are NIL aims to keep Penn State football competitive in NIL the Penn State way. We Are NIL becomes the first NIL collective to provide permanent total disability, or PTD, insurance for student athletes. Offensive tackle Cajon Allen being one of them. We are committed to providing the coverage to eligible members of the Penn State football team. With your help, we can make Penn State football a national leader in name, image, and likeness. Make sure to go check out wearenilcollective.com. They have a couple different tiers where you can donate. Check them out. Links in the description. Thanks again. Real quick off the bat, I know we had a lot of commenters saying about the last instant reaction. I just wanted to address some things, put it all out in the open. I wanted to apologize for absolutely nothing. That podcast was awesome. The Auburn win was awesome. I don't care what anybody says. It was a great game. I wish it was like the Auburn of like 10 years ago, maybe. It would have made it a little better, but we'll take it on the road. So we'll start off with our offensive side of the ball, quarterback play. Sean Clifford played about as good as you can ask on the road. No turnovers. Zach, I'll turn it over to you. I know you have his stat line up already. So tell me what you think about Sean Clifford, and then we'll go around the horn.
Yeah, and I think we covered, or at least I feel like I covered in the last section how I think when you give Sean Clifford a running game, when you play good defense, when you kind of build around him, he can be exactly what you need him to be. I don't think any of us have any delusions that he's an elite quarterback, but I look at the two Auburn games, and he's 42 of 51 for I want to say around 400 yards with 2 touchdowns and a pick. So we almost scored more touchdowns in the Auburn games than we had Sean Clifford in completions. And the thing about those 2 games is that we protected the quarterback. And I mean, there was maybe a play or two last Saturday where he was actually pressured, and we had a running game. So it makes being quarterback so much easier. And I think he showed resilience, obviously, with that big hit where, frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if he hadn't gotten up from that hit. We talked a little bit about how questionable it may have been to call a QB sneak immediately after that, but I like the aggression, just maybe didn't like the selection on the play call. But yeah, I was impressed. I think maybe the Drew Aller situation's actually been good for him, and to have somebody behind him that is getting playing time that is a 5-star recruit, just kind of the iron sharpens iron. And obviously last year, you look at the situation that the backup was so bad that we couldn't even snap the ball on the road. So it's not like he was getting any pressure in practice. So I've been really impressed. I think if he can stay healthy, he's going to have a really good year. If we can continue the run game, he's going to be just fine. I mean, I don't want to belabor the point. He was very good. And frankly, like I said, in both Auburn games, he was maybe 2 of his better games in his career were the 2 Auburn games over the last 2 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we talked about it in depth on our instant reaction, but he looked good. He did everything we wanted him to. I got no complaints with that. I'll turn it over to our Drew Aller homer, Devin. Tell me what you think.
Yeah, I was literally just going to kick this off by saying, like, I'm clearly the biggest Drew Aller fan on this podcast. and Sean Clifford is completely the starter in my book. Like, there's no delusions anymore that I want Drew Aller starting. Sure, that can change very fast with Sean Clifford, but he played really, really well on Saturday. So effective. I mean, 14 completions for 178 yards doesn't blow anybody away, but that's the kind of game that Sean Clifford should play. I mean, we don't need him slinging it 60 yards down the field every game because that's not what we need out of him. And I think Zach hit a really big key there is giving him the running game. We said that Auburn secondary was trash anyways. So now if you're forcing them to worry about the run as much as we did, it just allowed Sean Clifford to do so many good things. He also looked pretty competent running again. I thought that was the best out of the 3 games that he looked running. Obviously, he only had 6 carries, but I thought he looked better running. So that's a good sign. I think he's getting healthier, which is so weird after he got his clock absolutely cleaned. But maybe that cleared some cobwebs up and now he can run a little more effectively. So hopefully he can keep that going. This week should be a nice one for him to stay in the groove a couple weeks here and get into Michigan. But I was really impressed with Sean. I thought he played well.
Yeah. And just a side note, it's always a concerning, or it might be really good, that Clifford had more receiving yards than Lambert Smith. So
yeah, seriously.
Just a fun fact. Alex, being an Alabama fan, this must remind you of the Alabama of old, just, hand it off, dominate Auburn, and, get it done on the road. So you got anything to say about the Sean Clifford side of the ball?
Yeah, I think at quarterback, having somebody that is effective and not necessarily elite is the most important thing. Like, you see it all the time, especially with Alabama. You see guys like John Parker Wilson, AJ McCarron. These guys aren't elite quarterbacks, but they just go out, do the quarterback job, throw a couple completions, get the ball in the hands of your running back, win the game. And I think that's, like Devin just said, that's exactly where you want somebody like Sean Clifford. And especially with the coming out party that Nick Singleton had against Auburn, it showed the experience of a 6-year starter. So that's exactly what you want out of somebody like Clifford.
Yeah, exactly. You nailed it, I think. So moving on, we'll talk about our offensive line. I mean, they played the best game they played all year. And I don't have all the stats on the sacks and the hurries, but we just looked very competent, other than our right tackle position, maybe a little suspect, but everywhere else looked great. And we really didn't see with Sean Clifford the over the top happy feet that he sometimes gets. There was a few instances of it, but even those, he was completing the passes still. So how'd you guys think our offensive line handled their pressure? And do you think our offensive line is equipped to handle the Michigan and Ohio States of the Big Ten East? Or do we think Auburn was just kind of fraudulent? Zach, I'll turn it over to you.
Maybe a little bit of both. I think obviously, again, I said it with talking about Clifford. I can't recall too many plays where he was actually pressured. And actually, I'd like to go back and watch it. I feel like Auburn didn't really bring that much pressure. And one of the things we talked about in the preview video was that it seemed like Auburn's secondary was pretty suspect. Obviously, San Jose State had pretty good success passing on them the week before. So it might have been the type of thing where Penn State's MO is they can't run the ball, but they are a pretty potent passing offense. So maybe we'll kind of game plan for that. But the other book on Penn State is if you can get in the backfield and just attack Clifford all day, there's going to be turnovers. There's going to be, good things happening defensively. So for me, it was a little weird. And again, at home with the crowd and the energy, it just seemed like Auburn defensively was just kind of, I don't know, conservative, not really on the attack. But I think the offensive line played. We talked about this. The offensive line got an A+ for me. I think, we talked about Caden Wallace having some struggles at Purdue. We had a couple sacks, I think, against Ohio. And sometimes it's not clear if that's a coverage sack or maybe the quarterback holds the ball too long. Everybody in the entire operation was on point Saturday. There was no sacks. There was 0 sacks by Auburn. There was maybe a quarterback hurry or two, but for the most part, Clifford, there was a little bit of pocket collapse or pressure. He kind of moved his feet and completed the pass or got the ball out with ease. So if you can continue to build on that, plus the running game, I think the left side of the offensive line for me, and including the center too. I mean, Olu Fashanu has been great at left tackle. I actually thought Landon Tengwall, the redshirt freshman, had some great blocks. And for me, so many of those Nick Singleton plays, those big plays in the last 2 weeks have been off the right side of the line, but with Landon Tengwall pulling from the left guard spot, I've kind of noticed that. Number 58, I think he's been great. I'm excited again. That was the name we talked about. I think I talked about all the way back in the season preview. As if you can get him, that's a big time recruit. If you can get him cooking, Juice Scruggs, the veteran at center, has been great. You haven't seen. Sometimes you see the pocket. The issue isn't the tackles. The issue is the pocket gets blown up right up the middle, and the center is just thrown into the quarterback's face. You haven't seen any of that. So I think we could sit here and talk about the offensive line and sing their praises all night, because that's where it starts. And to answer your second question quickly, will we see that versus Ohio State or Michigan? I don't know. I think we can tip our cap to the offensive line right now and be really excited, but it's a whole nother beast when you go from a team that's struggling to the elite teams in the country, because I think there's no position group that shows the disparity greater in talent than the defensive line. I mean, and we've seen it with Ohio State and Michigan. Aiden Hutchinson last year, Chase Young at Ohio State a couple years ago. When teams have those types of guys, there's almost nothing you can do. If your talents aren't on that, if your tackles, for instance, aren't on that level, there's just like nothing you can do. So I don't know if either of those teams have those guys this year. So I'm excited, but I'm still sort of cautious about where it goes from here with some of the bigger teams on the schedule.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just think, like you said, we saw that disparity, and maybe this is a recruiting trend. I haven't really followed Auburn recruiting that tightly, so I can't tell you how they've recruited defensive and offensive linemen, but it really looked like we, had a massive advantage on both sides of the ball. So Devin, did you want to touch on anything else, or?
Yeah, I think Zach hit a lot. I'm glad you brought up Landon Tengwall. I was going to say the same thing. I thought he played excellent. I thought it was his best game of the season, even though he's played well. I think it was his best game of the season. I also think Wormley played pretty well. I mean, he had a couple plays where I was like, I don't know what you're doing, but I thought overall Wormley played pretty well. I'm still a little unsure about Wallace, which I'm bummed because our sponsor it works with him, but hopefully he can step up still. But I think Zach really covered it. The biggest thing for me with an offensive line when we have to pass is creating that pocket where Clifford can step up, because he's proven that if he can step up in the pocket, he's better than rolling out to his right or to his left at either way. And I'm sure a lot of quarterbacks are like that, just wanting to step into it. So the fact that anytime the 3 or 4 times I can think of that we got a little bit of pressure brought, we were able to let Clifford step up and create the passes that he wanted to. I think that's a big deal. To your second point, I'm not ready to say that we can contain Michigan or Ohio State. I know Jordan thinks Ohio State's a fraud, but we'll see. I mean, I hope so. I really do. Because
I think their defensive side of the ball definitely, I think, can cause problems.
Yes.
That's not so much what I'm judging Ohio State off. It's just, I don't think their offensive side has looked very good. That's
so I don't know. It's still too far away. Obviously, I think Penn State, out of the 3 teams, I think Penn State has probably proven the most to me out of the 3, even though when we get to our top 10s, they're the lowest out of those 3. So that doesn't make a lot of sense. But I'm basing it off of something Zach hates is last year. So that's all I'll say.
All right.
But the O-line played great, and that's what matters.
Yeah. Alex, did you want to talk anything about maybe Auburn's defensive pressure against our O-line, or just Penn State's O-line and how they looked impressive this week, if you want to touch on any of that?
I mean, what was the total rushing yards for Penn State last weekend? Like, it's
245, I think.
I think that's exactly all you need to know.
There you go.
Like, it's that simple.
You do the podcast, but knows the deal.
It's not. I mean, it's not rocket science. If your fucking offensive line's playing good, you move the ball. That's
exactly.
It's like, listen, that's John Madden commentating there, but it is what it is.
Yeah. Well, that ties in perfectly. We're going to talk about the running backs, and I mean, everybody just talking about Nick Singleton, and apparently he prefers to go by Nicholas Singleton. So if you guys didn't know,
get over yourself.
That's the word on the street. So hopefully he doesn't.
His Twitter handle says Nick.
Yeah, that's what everybody keeps saying, but apparently
character limited.
There you go. I've been calling him Nicky, so
Ooh.
but yeah, everybody wants to talk about him, and I mean, he has an amazing game again. 3 straight games where he is just beating that home run hitter for us. He's averaging 11 and a half yards a carry or something ridiculous through 3 games, which is kind of wild. But I want to talk about Allen and how impressive he's looked as well. I mean, he was picking up, 7 to 10 yard chunks at a time consistently, which is something we haven't seen in the running back room in a very long time at Penn State. So, Zach, I'll turn it over to you. What's your thoughts on our running game, and do we believe the hype that is Nicholas Singleton?
Yeah, I'll say kind of. Again, I think he's clearly the real deal. I think there are freshmen that, and we're not at practice again. We're not in summer 2-a-days, but
Not yet.
He strikes me as like as soon as he showed up on camp, everybody on the team was like, okay, this guy is going to be getting the ball. He's playing. He's got that breakaway speed. There were runs he had against Auburn that a lesser back without the speed. You're not beating the safety to the sideline and then getting it in for a touchdown. The thing you mentioned too, though, is really important. Is I really like Allen as well, and I think he's going to be kind of sliding under the radar. I think with Singleton, it's been mostly get him the ball under center and get him in the backfield, hand it off to him when he's at full speed. If there's a hole that breaks open, he's through it and he's gone. With Allen, some of the more like zone-based run plays and some of the more lateral running plays where he's been able to kind of like dart behind offensive linemen and wait for the hole to open up. I really like his vision and his patience.
I was just going to say
he falls forward. He's just he doesn't have the speed, but he's got all of those sort of like the name that I threw out this weekend was sort of Evan Royster. Just doesn't look fast, doesn't look super fast, doesn't look super big or strong. Just always finds a hole, always finds a crease to stick his nose in and get 3 or 4 yards and fall forward. And there's always a role for a guy like that in a running game, especially as you get into some of these. I hate to always just talk about Michigan or Ohio State, but the 70-yard touchdown plays from Singleton, I hope we see them one every week. But against the better defenses, it's hard to do that. And so the ability to get 4 yards and get 4 yards and get 4 yards and get 4 yards, that's a proven commodity. And I really, not to say that I don't think Singleton can do that, but I really think Allen has already carved out that role as just a guy that he'll turn a play where there's not a whole lot there. He'll be patient and he'll find the vision and get a couple yards. And that's big.
Yeah, and something that struck me, and maybe you guys want to talk about this too. If you watch the presser with James Franklin, he's actually talking about how happy he was to get Ford the ball at the end of the game. And it just kind of like took me back a bit. Like, you have these 2 really young, phenomenal running backs, but you're most excited about getting, what is arguably our 3rd best running back on the team, some reps. So 4th, that's Devin's opinion. I think Lee doesn't have a role in our team, to be honest, in my opinion. But Devin,
I think he's a power back on a team that doesn't really value power formation is probably the best way to put it. But I mean, I think he's done some good things, and actually Ford, the last drive where Penn State marched down and got stuffed on 3rd down and kicked a field goal in the 4th quarter, Ford looked really good too. I mean, that was the thing for me, is like, it didn't matter who the back was. Even Lee didn't have a lot of carries, but I think he averaged 4 yards a pop. It was just the fact that it didn't matter who the running back was. 90% of the run plays ended in a good result. Was just, for me, like, that was the most shocking thing at all. It's one thing that Nick Singleton was just faster than everybody. It was another thing that it looked like our scheme and strategy and game plan was just working on every play and everyone was executing. And that for me was just, again, we've kind of been lost in the wilderness for a couple of years from the run game standpoint. To see that play after play after play was so refreshing. I
mean, even back, we say we're not going to talk about 2017, but we bring it up all the time. Even back with Saquon Barkley, we weren't running the ball like this.
We never had a game like that. Yeah. We never had a game like that. We had games where we ended with 250 rushing yards, but it was Saquon juking 13 tackles on one play and getting 80 yards and doing that a couple times.
Back to the offensive line play you guys were just talking about.
Yep.
So
yeah,
that's a big part of it too.
Yeah, it's kind of full circle. Your running backs are only going to be as good as their offensive line plays sometimes. And you saw it with Tank Bigsby. I still think he's going to be a really good NFL running back, but man, did we shut him down. And I think it was because his offensive line had no forward push. I mean, he was getting the ball and he was already getting hit by 1 or 2 guys by the time he got the ball. So Devin, what do you think about the running back committee and Nicholas Singleton and Cajon Allen?
Yeah. So Nick Singleton jersey already ordered. I'm on. Nicholas. Sorry, Nicholas, if that's what you want. Love it. I watched Nicholas Singleton in high school, saw him play a lot, and I expected him to be this good. I didn't expect him to be this good in week 3 at an SEC school, even though, I mean, I think we're all on board that Auburn is just really bad right now. But still, to go to Jordan Hare and have that type of a game, super impressive. To talk about Cajon Allen, because I could talk about Singleton all day, but Allen was so impressive to me because of how he reads his blocks. The way he read his blocks reminded me of Le'Veon Bell, like while he was with the Steelers, not whenever he went to the Jets, but whenever he was with the Steelers. And his touchdown run, his second one, he waited for the guard to pull, waited, found the right seam, did a little jump cut to hit that seam. And then, I mean, it was only like a 7-yard run, but he accelerated up, got through the line. And I thought that was the most impressive run. Sure, Singleton had 2 huge runs where he got to the edge and was just faster than everybody. But Cajon having that patience and being able to hit that little jump cut into a touchdown, I thought was stupid impressive. And I hope Devin Ford and Kevon Lee understand that getting Singleton and Allen enough carries is what will get you to a college football playoff. And if trying to split 30 carries between the 4 of them is not going to do it. And I get that we were just talking about the offensive line and how they did a really good job. Kevon Lee at 4 carries, I think is perfect. I think Devin Ford at 4 carries would be perfect. 7 is probably because we were in such a blowout and he got a lot at the end. But if you can get Singleton 15 and Allen 10, I think that puts us where we need to be if we can run the ball the way we did.
Absolutely. And I think this upcoming weekend will be a good time if hopefully we can get out early and get those guys who are looking for more reps, like Lee and Ford, some more reps in a game that, we can actually rest our better players and save them for Northwestern and then following up with Michigan, because we're going to need them. And I don't think we're just going to railroad Northwestern. I think they're not that great of a team, but Pat Fitzgerald's a hell of a coach, and he's going to come to Happy Valley ready to play. So that's something you can always guarantee. So I'll turn it over to Alex. Do you have anything you want to say about our running back room in regards to SEC side of things? I know you're used to some really great, running backs down in the South.
So in terms of Singleton, I think he looked like a good running back versus a bad team. So is he going to be a great running back? I don't know. But so far, I definitely see a very good running back out of that kid. And as a true freshman, three games into the season, that's impressive. But I do like the Allen comparison to Evan Royster, and even better, Devin saying Le'Veon Bell, letting the play develop and then hitting his hole and finding where he's going to go and just always getting you those 3, 4, 5-yard gains when he touches the ball. He doesn't need to touch the ball a lot, but he's a workhorse. You get him in there, he'll get you your short yardage, take some pressure off Singleton, and then you let him break a big play. I mean, I agree with Devin's statement of splitting their main carries, maybe, 30 split between the 2 of them, and then maybe here and there you throw in the other 2. But I think you guys hit the nail on the head.
Yeah. And something we didn't really see much this weekend was any wheel routes. So that's something we got in our back pocket.
I don't know if you remember that, but we ran one, and I think it was Allen. And it was there, but he
was wide open. And
no, this one wasn't wide open, but it was open. And it was that pick player. One of the receivers got called for pass interference. I don't remember which one, but if was it Allen or Singleton? I don't remember. But if Clifford put air under it, it was a touchdown. It didn't matter because there was pass interference, but we did run it one time. So
the old shark wheel in the back pocket. But all right, we'll move on. Tight end group. For me, Brenton Strange was my player of the game. And that may shock some people, but I'm telling you, go back and watch those big runs Singleton had. Look who's pulling downfield, blocking for him. I mean, he was great all day. He had a bunch of great catches that got us, first down. Every time he did, I was hitting you guys with a little comment about how strange the play was. So I was saying that way too much. So that's how it Yeah, that's how you know the day for him. Zach, I'll turn it over to you. Our tight end play looked great. I mean, Strange obviously stole the show, but we did get a Theo sighting there at the end. And also Tyler Warren came in as a fullback again. So that's always good to see. So
Yeah, I think I don't think it's hyperbole actually to say Strange was maybe like the player of the game. He had a really good game. I question the unnecessary attempt to hurdle over a defender. I don't know if any tight end has ever accomplished that, but he just kind of bounced off the guy and kept going. He's actually had well, I think he's the leading receiver on the team so far, and he's had a ton of yards after contact. So he's just he's not fast, he's clearly not fast, but he is tough. He's strong. He doesn't fumble. He bounces off defenders and he blocks really well. And I don't want to belabor that. We talked about that in the last one, but the way they use him as in the run game is almost less like an inline tight end and more of like an H-back. You see him in that gorilla motion a lot. And my question for Franklin is, why don't you recruit fullbacks? Because they kind of actually use H-backs, but they just ask the tight ends to do it. And he's done great at it. So, and Tyler Warren has clearly moved into that number 2 tight end role. And I think he can do a little bit of everything as well. For me, the question going forward in these next 2 weeks are a great opportunity for it is, what is Theo Johnson's role? Because I think everybody has looked at him, or at least I have anyway. And I know I've said this, I think in the season preview, that he's a guy that I look to is this a guy that's going to blow up and just have a huge year? Because he's a freak athletically. I wonder if he's really just sort of a big wide receiver and he's not truly a tight end. I think his run blocking skills aren't quite there as far as Strange and Warren. So I don't know how that shakes out.
A Mike Gesicki, if you will, and
yeah,
a Pat Fryermuth kind of run blocker.
And
but also
the problem becomes, we've got I don't know if the depth is there yet, but we've got 3 really good receivers that the staff trusts, and you've got 2 tight ends that I think are ahead of him on the pecking order. So where does his role fit in if he's sort of like the exclusive pass catching tight end? I don't know. That'll be something I think to watch in the next couple of weeks. Because once you get into the middle of the season, it's really hard to start to shake the rotation. So if he doesn't kind of find his way back in, and Franklin never talks about injuries, so we don't know what he's dealing with, but I don't know. It's just one of those things where if he doesn't kind of find his way back into the rotation soon, it's hard to break in the middle of the season.
Yeah. And I will say this, our playbook is still evolving. And that's something we've seen Franklin and our offensive coordinators. Typically, you're not going to see everything we have, the first couple of weeks. So we could see some packages that maybe come out with 3 tight ends. Like, it's a possibility. So Devin, what do you have in the tight end room?
I don't really have anything else to add. I thought Strange played great, really good blocking, effective whenever they threw it to him. Obviously 6 catches, 59 yards after the catch. Really great stuff. Yeah, I thought he played really well. Tyler Warren, I know you guys both said he played well. I just felt like he wasn't really involved, which I don't know was a game plan or what, but I just didn't feel like I really noticed him even blocking other than those couple times, like once or twice where he basically was the fullback, like Zach said. So I don't know if that was maybe a plan or if it was just because Strange was playing so well that he was out there more. And I know Zach usually has the snap counts, and I don't know if you happen to have that up, but I would be interested, and I'll have to look it up then, what the actual snap count was. Because I thought Strange was on the field a lot, but I thought he played so well that I wouldn't have taken him off either.
Feed the hot hand,
We always say that, and Franklin doesn't always do it. So if that's what it was, then another check mark for Franklin becoming a better coach this season.
Yeah. Let Strange cook.
Yeah. Strange food.
All right. Enough strange puns. Alex, you got anything on the tight end side?
I mean, Brenton Strange is the type of tight end I like. That's for sure. Guy that catches the ball, makes contact, gets yard after contact, blocks well. So, I mean, yeah, he's not Zach Ertz. So,
yeah, and he's spamming the Y button like it's Jordo playing NCAA 14.
Yeah.
So we'll move on here. Wide receivers really kind of had a very quiet day, just because our running game was so effective. But I mean, Tinsley, he looked great once again. No drops across the board this week. At least I don't think I saw any drops. Not that I recalled. Not anything that wasn't, a defensive breakup or something like that. I'm talking like drops and wide open. But I mean, Parker Washington had a very quiet day. Lambert Smith had, 25 yards, I think. So it's just kind of interesting. Clifford played very well, but none of the wide receivers really had that big, impact on the game. Tinsley did have some good first down catches early, especially. So Zach, I don't know if you want to talk wide receiver room, and then we'll wrap up the offensive side of the ball, do our ratings, and then we'll take the commercial break.
Yeah, we talked about it in the last one. I think I felt like coming in, this was probably where we actually had a big time talent advantage, because again, it looked to me like San Jose State had, I don't want to say relative ease, but they had a lot of success through the air. And I think we kind of showed it early on too with Tinsley, that first scoring drive. Tinsley, couple great plays. I think the way I couched it after the game was, I feel like we probably could have thrown for 300 yards on them and had a lot of success through the air, but we just used it to we passed to open up the run. And then once the run game was cooking, we just really didn't need to take a lot of shots, and that's fine, right? I mean, I think if you can run. If you have to pass. It's kind of my old school looking at it, but I feel like if we needed to, I would have been more than happy to take shots with our receivers against their secondary.
Yeah, and I think you hit the point, if you can run. And I think that might be why Auburn, and especially their coach, is on the hot seat so bad, because I think I said this in the preview. Whenever you get beat on the ground and beat in the trenches so bad, it just makes the loss look so much worse than, it was. I mean, losing by 30 points is tough no matter what, but when you just get ran over the whole game, like, your fan base just feels defeated and usually ends up leaving in the third quarter, which we saw. So,
well, and I think on that point, I mean, talking about the running backs, the wide receivers, if you, and I think Gary Danielson may have even said this on the call, if you had just taken the teams and put them in like practice pennies or something, you would have sworn Penn State was the SEC team with the SEC athletes and the SEC speed. And that's probably as much of a crushing indictment of Auburn as it is a compliment to Penn State. But, usually when you play one of these types of Big Ten SEC games, and we're obviously not built and our roster is not constructed like a Wisconsin or an Iowa, but it's still a Big Ten team. And to hear that and to see that on the field where there clearly was no athleticism gap or talent gap or skill gap, that's a good sign. Again, how good is Auburn? Probably not very good, but still something to take away.
Yeah. I wouldn't know about the commentators because I watched it on mute. So, Devin, what you got?
So I'm going to take it a different direction. I thought Tinsley, my biggest question about Tinsley was he ready to play in the Big Ten coming from Western Kentucky? And he proved in the first 2 weeks that he's ready to catch passes, and he is a legit wide receiver. The thing that really stood out to me this game was his blocking. He is a much better blocker than I would have expected for somebody who came from a pass every chance you get offense. For him to get downfield and get some blocks, he's not an unbelievable blocker, but he's way better than I would have expected. And I think that's a big deal going into some of these bigger games as we get later in the season is can we trust these guys to block? I think Parker Washington has proven that he is a solid blocker. I think last year he was a little better than he's shown so far through 3 games. If I'm Parker Washington, I'm probably a little frustrated with how I've played these couple games. Not that he's played poorly, but I think he probably expected to be in that Jahan Dotson category that he's just hasn't been yet. Not that they've needed him. So for him to really buy into blocking, I think is going to be super important. And hopefully he can do that. But I just wanted to shout out Tinsley for being a better blocker than I really would have ever expected and freeing some things up downfield.
Yeah, that's all good stuff. So we're going to take the commercial break now, and then we'll come back and do our player rating or position ratings. Shout out to our sponsor. We are NILcollective.com. We Are NIL aims to keep Penn State football competitive in NIL the Penn State way. We Are NIL becomes the first NIL collective to provide permanent total disability, or PTD, insurance for student athletes. Offensive tackle Caden Wallace being one of them. We are committed to providing the coverage to eligible members of the Penn State football team. With your help, we can make Penn State football a national leader in name, image, and likeness. Make sure to go check out wearenilcollective.com. They have a couple different tiers where you can donate. Check them out. Links in the description. Thanks again. Welcome back from the commercial break. We're going to hit it with the position grades for offense. Real quick, quarterback. I got to give it a solid A across the board. Didn't do enough for an A+. Didn't do anything that deserves a B. So that's me for quarterback. Devin?
A.
A. All right. Zach?
Yeah, I'll say A-. I'm a tough grader, but A- we'll say.
Yeah. But you got to bring it down for that Auburn curve, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Bring up those lower grades. Alex, what'd you see from the quarterbacks?
A, but I agree. You don't get the Medal of Honor for doing your job, so just an A.
There we go. Move on to the offensive line. Absolutely A+. Can't find a flaw with it.
A.
A.
I'll say A.
Yep.
All right. This is going to be some real excitement here. Running back room. A+. Devin?
C-. Just kidding. A+.
A+. Zach?
I'll say A.
I agree with Zach.
We don't do A+.
Good running versus a bad team.
There you go. We usually don't cover the tight end specifically, but I just want to touch. I think the tight ends were A+ and kind of separated from the wide receiver core a little bit this week. So A+ for the tight ends, and I'll do my wide receivers. I'll give them a B+ because I don't think they did anything exceptional, but they didn't drop any balls and they caught passes. So that's what I got. Devin?
Tight end, I'd go A-. Would have liked to see a little bit more from Tyler Warren and still I have no idea what Theo Johnson's situation is. Wide receivers, I'll go B-. Would have liked to see a little bit more out of them as well.
All right. Zach?
I'll say A- for tight ends and B+ for wide receiver.
All right. Alex?
I agree.
Yes,
agree
no,
with
yeah.
yeah.
All right.
The wide receivers didn't do much because they weren't utilized much. So, they get a B-ish. Like, it is what it is.
Devin did touch on, I thought the wide receiver blocking was good. Specifically the one Singleton.
Well,
the
it's not a C, Zach.
I just want to point out, and you go back and watch it, the long Singleton touchdown off right tackle. I think it was Keandre Lambert-Smith was just like murdering a guy like 10 yards downfield, was just taking him and like running the quarterback downfield. And so anytime you see the receivers getting into it like that, that's also a good sign just from like a team morale standpoint. Just as a former wide receiver that played in a high school offense where we would pass the ball like 5 times a game, it's tough as a receiver when you think my job is to catch the ball, to be out there basically like taking on the role of offensive lineman. So I think that's a really good sign to see that from those guys.
Yeah, I agree completely. So real quick, we'll hit the defensive side of the ball. I think we talked a lot about our defensive line already. I mean, they absolutely dominated, something we haven't, seen up to this point really. But I mean, we looked good. The pressure, and this might be a scheme thing with Manny Diaz. I think he called, except a couple of long third downs, he called a great game. So, Devin, you want to talk about our defensive line a little bit?
Sure, throwing a curveball. Zach always goes first, but
on my screen now that we have 4 people, you moved up, so
okay.
So yeah, the defensive line played really well. I think you hit on it that Manny Diaz had a great game, called a lot of really good plays, which I think we could talk more about when we get to the linebackers. Some really good and special blitz packages that looked really nice. But the D-line did everything they're supposed to. It's funny when you look at their stats, like defensive linemen don't have a ton of tackles in the game, which I think is partially because of Auburn relying so heavily on the pass because they were behind. But, I mean, out of all the defensive linemen, Adisa Isaac led the team with 3 tackles. So it shows a lot that the pressure they gave forced the quarterbacks into throwing, both of them, Ashford and Finley, forced them into throwing 38 combined times, which allowed our linebackers and our DBs to make a lot of plays. So, but that starts with pressure from the D linemen.
Yeah. And probably not the best move to do that when people are hailing our, secondary as,
right.
second coming of Christ. Zach, what do you got?
Yeah, I think the D line. I mean, it was clear all game they were in the backfield. There was moments where Finley and late in the first half and Ashford at the end of the game where they just looked like they didn't even want to be playing anymore. Like you could when the camera zoomed in on their face, they just
Like, get me out.
it's just like the pressure was that consistent. And for me, I think Chop Robinson is on the way to being a star. And the cool thing with him, unlike a lot of the guys you see in the transfer portal where they're seniors and they have like 1 year left and they or they have that extra COVID year or whatever. I think Chop Robinson is essentially a sophomore and has a couple years left after this year. So he's a guy that could really be a star. And Devin mentioned Adisa Isaac. He was a guy that I don't think we talked about him, but I thought he's really underperformed up and before the Auburn game because frankly, we haven't talked about him, which means he hasn't done a whole lot. And he's getting significant time at that other DN position. He's number 20. And I thought he was all over the place in the Auburn backfield. He had a really good game. I think Hakeem Beeman and PJ Mustapher in the middle really stopped things. At the end of the day, if you're stopping an opponent's run game, it's usually starting with those defensive tackles, because if you're just stonewalling the interior of the offensive line, it's hard to run the ball. And so I think those are the guys that are kind of the unsung heroes that often don't make the tackles. But I think if you go back and watch the tape, they're stonewalling the interior of that offensive line. So I got to call those two out.
Yeah, and definitely with PJ Mustapher, you saw him basically taking a guy out of the play almost every play, and that really opened up part of our scheme that we're talking about. And we'll talk about the linebackers here. Really opened up those linebackers to get into the backfield and cause a lot of pressure and a lot of mistakes. So, Alex, you got anything from your side? What you saw?
So I think the pressure was great from the defensive lineman. As a defensive lineman, your job is to just try and collapse the pocket or open up a hole and essentially block for the linebacker to get in there and make the play. So I think, as you guys just said, everything was on point for them, and they were getting a really good job of it done. So that's about all I got to say.
That's all that really needs to be said. We'll move on to our linebacking core. I mean, talk about a great game for our linebackers, and that was something we were very concerned going in. Is can our linebackers, have a complete game? I think we saw it this week. I know Devin's been itching to talk about the linebackers, so I'm going to turn it over to you. Hit those big points on our linebacking core, maybe our scheme in general. I mean, Manny Diaz, for me, called his best game so far. And I think we're growing as a defense. And I was a little skeptical the first couple games, but, if we can dial up blitzes, which is what he's known for, and kind of force those 3rd and longs. Now, maybe we can get a couple more of those to be stops instead of, a 3rd and 20 and 3rd and 18 that get converted. That'd be ideal. But, just getting them into those 3rd down positions, like the stopping part should come with some more experience. So, Devin, what you got from the linebacker side?
Yeah, like you said, we had so many questions about the linebackers. We thought this was a game where Auburn was going to run the ball a lot and that we would really see where the linebackers are with a young, very inexperienced group of linebackers because of how much we've lost over the last few years. First and foremost, just get it out of the way. Abdul Carter is that guy. He is legit. I was really hesitant to say it after the first few games. I thought he was getting a little bit too much hype for obviously he played well, but I thought he was maybe getting a little bit too much hype. Nope. He got the right amount of hype. I think he's going to be really, really good. And I think Zach hit on it that he was not a 5-star guy coming out of high school. And for him to be playing this well 3 games into his season, I think it's just incredible. The thing that's really impressive to me about him is how all over the field he is. Sometimes he is the blitzing linebacker. Sometimes he's coming from different angles or different positions on defense. Diaz liked to bring that cornerback blitz. He ran that at least 3 or 4 times, a corner blitz, where Abdul Carter ends up dropping into coverage. Something that as a freshman linebacker is really impressive for him to be dropping into coverage on a wide receiver because we're bringing a specific blitz from the corners. But he played really well. Elsdon, I thought, played well. Still waiting for Jacobs to have that breakout game, but I thought he played well. He didn't do anything. There wasn't any times where I was like, man, Jacobs is hurting us. I feel like we have high expectations for him because he is the one guy with more experience. But overall, I thought the linebackers played really well. Diaz has some creative blitz packages that I think are really going to help us, and hopefully didn't show too much. because I think that it will help us when we get to Ohio State and Michigan. And like Jordan said, Ohio State's offense hasn't looked amazing. I know they just put up 250 points on Toledo, but they haven't been outstanding. So I think that's a big deal coming into that stretch.
Yeah, and I will say you missed a huge point is they don't give number 11 to just anybody. And I think I hit the...
I should have said it. I've only heard it 20 times. Sorry. So sorry.
I think I hit the under 5-minute mark for that bet. I remember getting that text like early first quarter, and you're like, there it is.
Yep.
So I'll turn it over to Zach.
Yeah, so I
know
will.
Devin pretty much crushed the
He did, and I won't
but...
belabor it. I will one brief correction on the coach if I can. I will say Curtis Jacobs had one huge play that I think was somewhat of a early turning point in the game on Penn State's first defensive drive after the decision to go for it on fourth down. Auburn semi-marched into the red zone, and Curtis Jacobs was the one who had that big third down sack.
So that's what I meant. Like he makes that play, and then where was he the rest of the game?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I meant. But yes, you're right. I didn't say that. So.
And what's interesting for me is I think I heard this in the Franklin presser that they actually have Abdul Carter. And this gets into the X and O's a little bit, playing the will, which is where Curtis Jacobs plays. So I think, and I want to go back and watch and see if they're on the field at the same time. And I think they're actually he's like the next Curtis Jacobs. And for me, with Carter's size, I wonder if he's ultimately becomes a middle linebacker, and it's just too much of a tough ask to say to the true freshman, like, hey, we need you out there playing the mic and calling the defense and being responsible for everything. And so I wonder if maybe he becomes they'll eventually kind of transition him into that role where, Micah Parsons is a great example where they started him out his freshman year. And even with the Cowboys, I think they the first year they were kind of just like, hey, just play on the edge and blitz the quarterback. But by his last year at Penn State, he was sort of the do everything middle linebacker, be on the field all three downs. And I can't wait to watch Carter for the next couple of years, see if they kind of transition him into that role. But other than that, I'll echo what Devin said. I thought the linebackers really answered the bell. I still, if I can put my Penn State pessimism hat on, I don't think we got from Auburn the challenge that I was expecting we would get in that a team that's really competent at running the ball. I think I feel it's weird, and I've said this before, I feel a lot better about our personnel and our scheme defensively playing Ohio State, even though they're, murder, death, killing everybody offensively. But I think we've got the athletes and the linebackers that can play in space. Yeah, well, but I wonder, there's no replicating what Michigan or what Wisconsin does until you play a team like that and they go out there. We saw it last year with Illinois, and we weren't ready for it. And I don't know if that was just like a hangover where we weren't mentally prepared, or we just physically weren't ready for it. But Illinois came out with, a jumbo package with an extra offensive lineman and 2 tight ends and a fullback, and they just ran it down our throat.
The Maryland die.
It's hard. Yeah, it's hard to prepare for that or say that you're ready for that. A team like a Michigan, and Michigan, even under Harbaugh, they've kind of opened up. So they're not quite the Stone Age football that they were even 5 years ago.
Stampede formation.
Run 75 times a game.
Right. But they definitely, Michigan has a really good offensive line. I don't think nationally people are talking about that. And I've kind of been down on Michigan, not to make this a Michigan discussion, but so I'll leave it with basically, I'm really optimistic based on what we saw from our linebackers, but I'll still have a little bit of caution. Schematically, there's some teams that might be able to take advantage of what we don't do well, but I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Alex, you got anything else to add?
Is Manny Diaz the guy to bring linebacker U back?
I don't think it ever left.
Fair.
I mean, I'm just saying we have a bunch of linebackers in the NFL still. So. But yes, I think we were skeptical, especially with all the turnover chain nonsense he had at Miami. Like, is that going to fit into, the Penn State culture? But I think he's done a very good job so far. And I know we can't ride this high of Auburn forever, but he looked the part of the play calling defensive schemes. If we can just shore up a little bit on the tackling side, which isn't something we've been doing super great, but I think that could be a key for, getting those wins on the road at Michigan and then at home at Ohio State, which I think is what we're all looking at. And maybe we shouldn't be looking that far ahead, but that's what it kind of feels like at this point in the season. So we'll move on.
I will say, if I can real briefly, I'm getting back to Manny Diaz, I'm a huge proponent of failed head coaches that are defensive coordinators at heart. Will Muschamp right now is a guy. He's a defensive coordinator at Georgia. I think you see a lot of times like Manny Diaz. Sometimes there's guys that just aren't fit to be a head coach, and he's still young, so he's not. I think he probably still has ambitions to get back to the top. So I think that was actually a really good hire by Franklin to find a guy that, and I don't even know if he like truly failed at Miami. He just didn't deliver them to the promised land that like the last 6 coaches haven't. But
I don't know what they expect down there, but
right. But I think he's a defensive guy at heart, and I think that was just a good hire to find a guy that's probably ambitious to get back. And the for me, the last couple of weeks, just the blitzing, because with Brent Pry, and we talked about this in the preview, Penn State is sort of your typical like just sit in your 4-3 shell, play a lot of cover 2. Not really, you keep the defense and keep the ball in front of you and tackle. And we're seeing something different, and we may get burnt in some games, but I think for a lot of Penn State fans, I mean, there was some 3-1-7 that we ran.
I was just about to say that.
Like at this point, I'm waiting to see a play where we have like 11 defensive backs on the field at one time. So he's just got a lot of pieces that he can interchange. And we talked about Franklin making a depth a priority. And I think you're seeing that in that there's so many combinations that they can run out there, depth in the secondary, especially that Diaz can basically whatever he wants to do. He has the personnel to do it. So there's really no excuses from a personnel standpoint.
And I will say, I don't know how this has happened, but I'm becoming somehow like a Franklin lover. And he's given Manny Diaz the keys to that defense. And you can tell because he's like, hey, maybe this is Franklin not being a defensive coach, as he was a wide receiver coach prior, and then obviously the head coach. But I think he's just like, hey, you run the defense and like don't embarrass me, basically, is what it kind of looks like. But it's working for now. We'll see how we hold up against the big dogs. So speaking of seeing 7 DBs on the field, that secondary looked pretty good. We didn't have, the Joey Porter show super standout that some people were predicting, and maybe that's indicative of how good our defensive line and linebackers played, that they really didn't throw that much towards Porter. But what did you guys see from our secondary side? Devin? Sorry.
Yeah, so I think you hit it there. That they didn't really go at Joey Porter, it seemed like. I didn't break down the film or anything, but just the way I felt watching it and watching highlights a second time, it did not feel like they threw it towards Joey Porter a lot. The one name that I'm just going to throw out is Zakee Wheatley. I think Zakee Wheatley is a really good player, and it's interesting to see how much playing time he's getting. Obviously, the other guys we've covered so many times already this year. Jair Brown played his best game of the year. Still didn't play great, but played his best game of the year. Daquan Hardy got burnt 2 or 3 times again, which is really frustrating because I like him so much. But I think Zakee Wheatley is a name to watch for the rest of this season. I think he's going to keep making plays. That interception was huge, just a crucial interception that he got. And he's doing a really good job in his role, not really being flashy, but is making plays. So he's my standout
for sure.
Sorry, what'd you say?
I said he's the turnover king for sure.
Yeah, starting to get that.
Yeah, Zach, what do you got?
Yeah, I think Wheatley has really impressed, and I'll go on that same play when Wheatley made the interception. If you go back and watch, they actually had Jalen Reed, the other safety, number 7, was in. So both, I don't know, maybe Jair Brown and Keaton Ellis were all in at the same time too. But in any event, Jalen Reed blitzed off of Auburn's left side. Finley rolled out to the right and was like running to the sideline. And if you watch how far Jalen Reed had to run before he didn't slow down a beat. Some guys might give up on the play. He just kept after it. TJ Finley kept kind of just meandering to the sideline, holding the ball. And Reed got there, made the hit that popped the ball up into the air that Wheatley caught. And that to me was indicative of just like the tenacity. And again, it was a play with a blitzing safety basically on the wrong side. They roll out to the right and he doesn't quit on the play. We make a play on the ball and we have a turnover. We talked about it. I talked about it a little bit ago, just in terms of the depth that Manny Diaz can basically roll with whoever he wants at both cornerback and safety, whatever combinations he thinks is working, he can roll with that. Daquan Hardy, Devin's all over it. He did not have a good game. He got beat a few times. For me, life is very fickle if you're the slot corner. Sometimes it's almost easier if you're like the Joey Porter and you're just the boundary corner or the field corner, and you're just matching up with their guy along the sideline, and you have the sideline as the barrier. When you're the slot corner,
they can go anywhere.
It's not, yeah. And you saw, I mean, he got burnt a couple plays, but the one Finley actually threw a really good ball, and I can't think of the Auburn receiver's name, but it was number 14, and he made one hell of a catch. And Hardy was in pretty good position, and this kid made one hell of a catch. For whatever reason, Auburn did not throw to that receiver again for the entire rest of the game. But I'm not down on Hardy. I think he'll bounce back, but
he doesn't quit on the play at least.
Right. And you know, for me, schematically, my only real concern was some of those long 3rd and 20s. There was 2 3rd and 20s they converted, and you know, either stick with your blitzing nature or you know, throw some kind of zone coverage out there that's something other than it just looked like prevent defense, where it was 3rd and 20 and we had 3 or 4 defensive backs playing, you know, quarters basically across the field and retreating backwards at the snap of the ball, and we're just creating way too big of a buffer. I don't know. It's just It's easier said than done. You don't want to put too much pressure on a long 3rd down like that, where you're giving them something over the top. But if the only takeaway from the secondary is that we got beat once or twice and we were a little too easy on 3rd and long, then you know you can live with that and improve.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that interception, you know, maybe Auburn thought the quarter was over already. So
it definitely was, and
that's some great SEC officiating there.
Well, they're actually Big Ten refs, so we've been victimized by it before. So
that didn't land.
But that's and not to drag it out, but that's one of those things where, and I say this all the time, all these major college football teams have like 100 coaches standing on the sideline. How somebody didn't catch that
and challenge it, and they even said that on CBS that it was challengeable.
I wasn't sure when it first happened if like the game clock is a challengeable thing, but it was like a noticeable like full second after that it hit 0. So easier said than done again, but you'd think somebody's job on the sideline would be to be watching those types of things and say,
well, especially the quarter ended, so like they could have challenged it
like during commercial break or
like
and you know,
they had like 10 minutes of time to challenge it. Just like maybe that's the state of Auburn's program, though. You know, like in all honesty, that may really be where they're at. So
I think it is a big mess over there.
Yeah. So we'll move on. We'll hit special teams real quick. I mean, we didn't really need our special teams this week, so field goal team did their job, made the extra points, no problems there. Punting, didn't really have to punt. We went for it on 4th down on a time when we probably could have punted, maybe pinned them deep, but I didn't have any problems with our special teams. Auburn's special teams didn't look that great either, so I was hoping to see Nicholas Singleton run to the house. I told Zach to be prepared because I thought he might break one loose, but we didn't get one this week, so maybe next week. But you guys got anything on special teams? If not, we'll just go to player grade.
Pinniger really responded for me. He made a 48-yard field goal. That was big. He got straight. Coach Devin really took him to task last week, so it was nice to see him bounce back. And we've talked about it, having a reliable kicker, especially in the college game and the way the overtime's structured. You have to have a reliable kicker. I mean, maybe not necessarily from 48, but we saw some things in the Ohio game that kind of scared everybody. So I think it was really nice to see him bounce back and have a really solid game.
And I think that might be indicative too of our coaching staff, that they, maybe they're picking up on these things, and like, we actually have a good special teams coach who's sitting down with these guys like, hey, like, you need to start bringing your A game, or it could be like next man up kind of thing. So it's good to see there. We'll do defensive player grades. I'll start defensive line. I think was A+ this weekend. That's all I really have to say about it. They got to the quarterback or got pressure and really set things up for our linebackers. You guys have any additional things you want to say about the defensive line, or give a different grade?
I'd say A-.
I'm giving A's to each position group.
Okay, so we'll skip for the rest of the position group.
So Auburn, keep in mind, Auburn scored 12 points, but the touchdown came in garbage time when we were already probably onto our third string. So they had a lot of hollow yards, but we basically held them to 6 yards during the points of the game when it actually mattered. Yeah. So for me, I'm giving everybody an A.
I'm okay with giving everybody an A.
Sounds good.
All right. Sounds good. So that's going to wrap up our Auburn post-game analysis. Real quick, I mean, do you guys even want to cover Central Michigan in all honesty?
Dude, it's a Mac attack. You got to cover it.
It's a sacrifice. I mean, I think why don't you just explain them, do your normal thing that you do, and then we can just talk about everybody can just say like a general thing about the game and talk about the game, and then that'll be it. But
it's a visit for transfer portal kids deep in the Penn State depth chart. All right,
Chad Powers. We might get Chad Powers out there.
So I mean, I'll just start. Central Michigan.
Ask before the Auburn, when you leave Auburn, you could ask Alex as the resident Alabama football expert to just chime in on the state of the Auburn program and what he thinks.
Yeah. Why don't we turn it over to Alex?
I don't know if he has. I didn't want to take just in case he had some real aggressive takes that he wanted to fire on his rival program, but
yeah, I'll turn the mic over. I
it's
gotta grab my
computer
charger real quick, so I'll let Alex take the floor for a minute here.
I mean, it's a mess. I don't know what else they can do. They're gonna have to fire the coach. He's gonna get dumped next week, guaranteed. If they lose, who are they playing this week?
Missouri, yeah. If they lose to Missouri, they may
not. If they lose to Mizzou, yeah,
they might not win another game. And
because who's worse than them in the SEC? I don't think Alabama's playing Vanderbilt, and I don't think Vanderbilt's the worst team in the SEC.
Vanderbilt's shown some life, and I mean,
I think South Carolina's worse. I think Mizzou's worse. Auburn's definitely worse. So that's bad when you're worse than Vanderbilt.
And the other thing is, they wanted him out even if he was successful. So a lot of times
they're trying that coup over the summer.
Right. So, I mean, I think they look horrible, and I think they're going to go 4-8. But, and I'm trying to think, I think it was Ed Orgeron last year where they fired him before the end of the season. I think specifically because they were afraid, well, what if he scrambles together a couple wins unexpectedly and builds some momentum? We got to get rid of him now just in case something,
Well, you end up in the Penn State situation, but it's working for him.
Yeah. So. I mean, because the one thing, even though Auburn schedules a gauntlet, it's opportunities. Maybe they get lucky and they knock off a ranked team or two, and then
Iron Bowl's close every year.
Yeah, then all of a sudden it gets kind of hard to get rid of the guy because he can say, "Well, look, we're building something. We're turning it around." And so sometimes if you really want the guy out, you gotta fire him before he gets the opportunity to do that, which I think is wrong. I don't see much value in firing coaches mid-season, but
I don't either. I think you should just let him finish and then just give them their walking papers at the end.
Because with the transfer portal and everything, the kids they just quit. At that point, they quit. Whereas
they're
not in the locker room.
They're just going to leave.
Right. As bad as things look on the outside, we're not in the locker room. We don't know that the team's not rallying together and going to show up every week and compete. We don't know that they are, but we don't know that they're not. Whereas what I'm saying is once you fire the coach, it's a certainty that they're all packing it up. So
Nebraska, we'll take the Big Ten version of Auburn right now, which is Nebraska. That program's done for the year.
War damn Huskers.
Yeah, that's done. They're cooked.
Yeah. And one
who are they going to hire? What are you going to go dig Les Miles up? Because that worked so well for Kansas.
And same thing with Auburn
or Kentucky or wherever the hell he was.
It's not only is the state of the program not great from a wins and losses standpoint, but it's you hired this guy, you fired the AD, and then you tried to fire the coach after one suboptimal year. Who wants to come into that environment, right?
Right. Now you're going into a hostile workplace and you're just shit, I'm on the chopping block 3 games into the season.
Yeah.
So
I will say this, Auburn has a history of not firing coaches mid-season. That's I've watched a lot of Auburn podcasts over the last week just because I was, feeding off that energy. So I wanted to hear what Auburn fans and podcasts were saying. Obviously they were, crapping on their performance, but they were talking about the coaching problem and how Auburn, I think they have only fired one coach mid-season in the last 40 years or something crazy.
Well, I feel like nobody used to do that, and now all of a sudden it's really common.
I specifically remember that as an NHL, MLB thing, and NBA.
Yeah.
Like the NFL never did it, college football never did it. Like guys didn't get fired in the middle.
And
of
I
the
really
season.
think it was because like everything wasn't playoffs or bust. So you wanted to, even if things were going south, you wanted to maintain the season and hope that they could find it and turn it around. And also, and nowadays in the transfer portal, it's like just try to keep the team together for the season, finish things out. Like again, I think if you fire a coach in the middle of the season, it's such a like those guys are they're already
Your
like,
new coach is inheriting nothing.
yeah,
He gets
who
nothing.
wants
That entire starting roster is probably transferring. Congratulations, you just gave
it's going to get
Toledo
even
a bunch of new
worse.
starters.
Right.
Like,
Exactly. And to hit on some of our older fans who watch the show, you know, back in my day, a contract used to mean something and people weren't transferring and bowl games meant something and players weren't sitting out. That's all I got on that. In conclusion, Auburn is a dumpster fire right now. I did see they have some Lane Kiffin interest, which is kind of interesting. Lane Kiffin and Hugh Freeze are the two top candidates right now.
I think Hugh Freeze is a name to watch there. I don't know why Lane Kiffin would leave.
Well, yeah, why would Lane
Mississippi,
Kiffin leave?
But I
Well,
think
I thought they were just trying to get all the Old Miss coaches.
I think Hugh Freeze is definitely is a name to watch there because
I don't know why you would hire.
You got to think he's interested in another shot at the big time. And he was an Alabama killer. You know, say what you want about his morals and you know what he was using his offices for, but he obviously, I mean, he took an Ole Miss program that was nothing for quite some time and immediately built them up into a team that could beat Alabama. And then as soon as he was gone, they reverted back to nothing. And now Kiffin's kind of turned him around a little bit, but we'll see.
I mean, yeah, they beat Alabama, but is that like the gold standard for Auburn?
Yes.
Okay.
it is the gold standard for Auburn.
Then why'd they get rid of Gus Menzel?
Good question.
Yeah.
There it is. So, all right,
Yeah.
we're not turning into an Auburn podcast. We're putting them in the rear view, burying them with the 2016 pit tape. So,
and the
somewhere on West Campus somewhere.